currently happens counseling services and specializes in the outpatient treatment of adolescents, young adults, and their families with addictive disorders and dual diagnosis issues. A recipient of numerous awards for his work, John is also the co-author of the 2006 How to Help Your Child Become Drug-Free and 2012 Adolescent and Young Adult Addiction, the Pathological Relationship to Intoxication and the Interpersonal Neurobiology Underpinnings. I'm going to let John do the rest because we are running just a couple minutes late. For those of you that are not familiar, we are opening a Folsom Clinic outpatient program. I have placed a flyer at each of the seats. So if you have any questions about that, make sure you email me. And then we also have our resources, and John has some of his resources back here. And John has your book, right?
I just brought one.
Okay, all right. Well, at least you'll know what it looks like. So give John a warm welcome and thank you for coming.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm kind of loud. All right, good. That'll work. She mentioned one of my books, How to Help Your Child Become Drug-Free. After 3,000 copies were sold, I said to my web guy, let's just make it a free download at this point and not for sale. So it's a free download on my website's homepage, so just FYI as a resource. The interpersonal neurobiology is where my mind has been relative to addiction and mental health and psychological and neurobiological development for the last 6-7 years now. And that's this book. It's on the website. I didn't bring a bunch of books to try to sell. I brought information. So hopefully I can get some, I'm all about thinking and thinking about thinking. So so I'll just get into it. Do you like the title? From heroin to marijuana, the paradigm shift that needs to happen now. Isn't it that, and you're like, I just want to hear what that's about. So I did get an email response, which might have been from one of you guys, or not. Maybe the person decided not to come and they asked me, are you trying to promote that marijuana should be used instead of heroin? And so let me just clear the deck. No, that's not my position at all. How many of you guys have a history of treating opiate addicts? Okay, so about a third of the room. Now, this is good for me to see that. If you don't have a long history of treating opiate addicts, what's informing your mind right now about opiate addiction is actually the media, and I get that. And there's been some good stuff in the media, and there's been some wrong, false information in the media. So, just to clean house on that, we could talk about it. One of the things, because if you're watching the Democratic debate right now, Bernie Sanders and Hillary, or Donald and Rubio and Cruz and all that, you're gonna hear about the opiate epidemic happening in New Jersey or across the country or in Ohio or wherever they're representing, or whatever state they're debating in at that day. Obama, State of the Union address, there was two things that really stood out for me. In the State of the Union address, I don't know if you guys saw it, but it was a couple of months ago, but the second thing he spoke to was that we're in a national crisis of an opiate epidemic. And I was like, yes, one for Obama right there. And then the second one that he spoke to as a guy in recovery for cancer, in addition to addiction, was at the very end when he told Joe Biden, hey, I want you to moonshot some kind of funding for cancer. And I mean, it's like addiction and cancer to me. I know I'm biased because I have to deal with that in my own recovery. But I don't know anyone that's not affected by someone that they know that has addiction or cancer. I mean, it's just around everywhere I go, addiction or cancer. So if we can get that stuff figured out and the government's behind that, that's going to be great. But so in the debates, they're talking about it, and what they're saying is, these doctors are overprescribing medicines for people that have pain issues or pseudo pain issues, and that's leading to the addiction crisis that we're in today. Doctors overprescribing leading to the addiction crisis that we're in today. And what I want to tell you, so I had a reality test, because I've been at this for a long time, since the mid-90s, and I saw, 7 years ago when the OxyContin epidemic hit, it became half of my the drug of choice in my program for 4 years until it was reformulated, then gone, and then it was Opana until heroin finally showed up in Sacramento, and then it became a lot of heroin use. And there's a lot of heroin use going on right now everywhere, and it's more likely to get worse than get better in the near future. But here's what I want to tell you about heroin use. And I called around today. Stephanie was one of them. Dr. Parr, Angela Barr, Dr. Johnson, my wife, Dr. Channer, because she's co-founded a program in town that was around for a while, and other people. And I asked this question to these folks. Of the opiate addicts you guys have treated, and you know, my practice, we got locations in Roseville, Davis, and Fair Oaks, and we see about 115 people a week. And I've been at it for a long time, so N for you statisticians, research science people, N equals a lot. I don't know what that number is, but if we're going to make generalizations, we need to have a large sample size, right? So we have a large sample size, and I would tell you this, after talking to most everybody, what's showing up is what I thought. 98% of the clients that we're working with that have opiate addictions, they were already addicted to some drug before they ever got opiate addicted. It wasn't that some doctor said, you got a pain problem, here's some medicine, and now you're addicted. We see plenty of those people who got into an automobile accident, had a bunch of surgeries, and they were prescribed medicine, and it led to an addiction. But that is far the exception to the rule. So the thing to know today, if we're going to talk about opiate addiction, is that the clients that you're seeing today may be now showing up and presenting with heroin addiction that wasn't there 5 years ago, OxyContin 5 years ago. The fact of the matter is that, that what's in front of you is not a heroin addiction. It's just addiction. It's just addiction. And so that's an important concept to kind of start to play with. That the heroin is not that important. That the addiction is the real illness. And that the addiction was there long before the heroin was there. Does that make sense to you guys? Any questions about that? I mean, you know, people get curious. Like, so if you're using drugs and you've been using weed for a long time or alcohol for a long time and you like intoxication, then you might try a couple of pills. You might try some hallucinogens. You might try an opiate. And you know, but the addiction was already there. So now, but you're like this, I like ice cream a lot. If ice cream is the intoxication, I like ice cream a lot, and mint chip is my favorite. And now I'm gonna go to 31 flavors at Baskin-Robbins and see what the next best flavor is. You know? Could always go back to my old one, but now I try another one. So these opiate addicts, because I'm just saying this because if you only know opiate addiction through the media or political debates right now and the political rhetoric, you're going to be under the impression that we have an opiate crisis because doctors are overprescribing medicine, opiate medicine, and that is not the case at all. It is that someone was already addicted to marijuana, alcohol, or some other substance, and then they tried opiates, and then it just showed up with those symptoms. So that's that piece. Good news, yesterday, unanimous vote, while we're talking politics, in the House or Senate, I forgot which one, but you can look it up online or on my Facebook page because I just posted it today. And unanimously voted to fund, to make sure that opiate addicts have access to Suboxone or buprenorphine. And that's a big, good deal. And I like that. Now, had I said that, and there's folks in this room that know this and remember this, had I said that 6 years ago, there'd be a lot of like, we need to pause now and stop there, John Daly. We need to talk about that because no addict should be using Suboxone or buprenorphine because that's an opiate drug, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But we've gotten into the science and not just the rhetoric of 12-step, which I'm in recovery, 12-step guy, but too many treatment programs are just going to do what they say at the meetings. You know, and we need to do what they say at meetings because there's a model that's been working since the 1935 in Akron, Ohio when it first all came around. But there's more to the story than that. We need to it's not about throwing one away, we just need to add to it. So I suffered as a clinician watching my clients suffer 6 years ago on buprenorphine with OxyContin and recovery going on, and they're going to meetings and people are like trying to get a sponsor and the sponsor's like, dude, you're using, like get out of here. Like they did with bipolar disorder in the 80s. You know, you're on lithium, you're using, get out of here. Prozac in the 90s, get out of here. But I think they're like this now, like, all right, we can't be doing that anymore. And programs are more up to date with the science. And now there's this new invention called medically assisted treatment, which is now looking at Suboxone and Vivitrol, which is probably even better to help people. So that's what's happening in the big picture. Back in the day, so Stephanie Lake, where'd Stephanie go? She and I were talking, and Claire and I are always talking, because we're old South Sac people. Heroin's not new at all. Heroin is not new. So Stephanie dealt with it when Chicago had it going on. Massachusetts, Boston. Boston. Back in the day, and they actually got beat up worse than we ever did back then. Growing up in South Sacramento, my buddy's uncle was the biggest dealer for this area in heroin. I never used heroin in my addiction because I saw so many heroin addicts, and I'm like, I know I would be addicted. You know, like, I'm not addicted to the drugs I'm using right now, while I was in my addiction, right? I'm not addicted to these drugs, but I'd be addicted to that, I'm sure. Like, I don't even want to risk that, because I was at their house all the time, and and I was like 15 years old, and there'd be like 30 people coming into the house, age 40, 50, 60 years old, low socioeconomic status, many had already served time in the joint, some were doing prostitution. People were coming in at 6 a.m., 30 people, taking orders to go boost. Boosting is when it's like, what size, I'll get you any clothes you want, brand new with the label on it, sell it to you for half price. Or tools, back then it was the Makitas, now it's the DeWalt's probably, tools or whatever. And they just take orders and they'd be back so then they'd fix right there in front of me. And I'm the 15-year-old kid watching this, and then they'd come back at 6 p.m. do the same thing. And then they'd leave, and then the door would shut, and two big old bolt bars would go behind that door so that the cops, when they'd kick in that door, would break their ankle. And that was the thought behind it. So that's what's happening in South Sacramento in the 80s all day long. So this is not a new phenomenon. It's just a flavor that's coming back to the community. And so we're having to deal with that. What's different is the socioeconomic status has changed. So I was hanging out with all these heroin addicts that many of them had already served, time in San Quentin back in the day when that was a really bad, hardcore prison. San Quentin and other prisons, many had spent time in jail. They were broke, they were uneducated, and today, the average heroin addict in our community is a white kid, 25 years old or younger, in Davis, Roseville. And I don't want to overly generalize, but in the dealers, white kid, 25 years old, younger. So the socioeconomic status has changed. So it's a different profile today. Highly educated families, broke families, it doesn't matter. It's an equal opportunity affliction, but we are seeing it hit the higher SES, where it used to be only a low SES thing. There was even shame about it within the drug culture community. I mean, I was around bikers that were not allowed to use needles, and they were, like shooting up heroin off to the side, at that house going, hey man, don't tell anybody about this, like keep it on the down low, so that's changed. So we might come from an old mindset that still thinks of the heroin addict as that profile. That's out the door. If you are a two-parent, educated PhD medical doctor family in Granite Bay, you're at risk of your kid having heroin addiction. It's just, so it's all across the board right now. One of the things that's not in the research, but we see this in our program because we asked this question, and other colleagues of mine asked this question, so I throw it out to you when you're working with the opiate addict, whatever the opiate addiction is, and that is, do you remember how it felt the first time you used an opiate? It was probably Vicodin or codeine or Norco or something like that back then. And what you're going to find is that for normal people, you feel nothing as far as energy. Or you feel maybe slightly sedated, or you don't like it with the way it feels in your stomach. Significant numbers of these opiate addicts, and I can't figure it out just one, I got some theories on it, they actually get energized from it. When their first time they use, they get energized from that. So that, when we look at what are your risk factors? Okay, you got genetic family history of alcoholism and drug addiction, you're at risk, that's a risk factor for addiction. you used at a very young age, your brain wasn't developed, your psychological coping skills weren't developed, your social coping skills weren't developed, another risk factor. So I'm telling you, when you do assessments and someone says they get energized from an opiate drug, though it's not in the data, there is something to that. And we'll have to figure that as time goes on. So I don't know if they're endorphin deficient. They could have had a lot of traumas early on. And so if it's a genetic, constitutional predisposition and vulnerability, or if it's traumas early on, big T traumas and misattunement, small T traumas that affected their dopamine system, activated apoptosis of blooming dopamine projections, or opiate systems, I don't know. But these are the things that are curious to me. So add that to the assessment. Any questions about some of that so far? That's actually a lot of information right there.
No kidding.
And it's thought-provoking, you know what I mean? Because it is, like I said, I like to think more about thinking than locked into it, because my mind is more organized around, I mean, I was going to be a research psychologist, and then I got talked out of it, and I did my master's degree, and I'm glad I got talked out of it. It's a more integrated me. So let me flip through some slides. But ask me questions as we go. This came out just the other day. I posted this on Facebook. These are death toll, and it's not in your handout. I apologize. These are, so red, the hot cells of red are where we're seeing overdoses from drugs in general, not specific to heroin. In red, it means over 100,000 per year. These are annual data. 2003 up in the top left, 2004, on and on. This is 2015. See where California fits into that, you know. So there's a growing, we'll see what the 2015 data say, you know, whenever they report that. That ought to be interesting. So drugs are always coming and going. This one's making a comeback, obviously, you know. There's another drug that's on my mind, just while we're on, you know, to trends, and it's a drug you guys have not heard of, probably, and that's Flakka, F-L-A-K-K-A. YouTube that. And, you know, I've done about 70 media interviews, and so anytime something goes down, then I get a call, and it's, you know, and a lot of those calls often are like things I don't want to talk about because it could ignite a problem that's not really there. So like when bath salts was all in the media years ago, I did what I did today, and I called all my clinical director friends of treatment programs. How many of you got teenagers actively using bath salts in the last year? And out of all this data, which represented probably 400 people seen in a month, there was like 3 cases. You know, so I told the media, I don't want to talk about something because you heard about something that happened somewhere else, and then we speak to something that's really not happening. Do you want to talk about marijuana? No, I don't want to talk about marijuana. They move along. Because I'm dealing with marijuana addicts all day long. And they'd move on. So I did get a call from the media, Claire Dewan from Channel 3 News, who's great at trying to be in front of the curve. And she asked me about Flakka, and I said, we have not seen that in our community. I've heard about it in the news, in the general news, the national news, but we haven't seen it. And then I get asked again a year later. So, and you'd hear that it's active in Florida, and then I'd watch these YouTube videos on it, type it in, and see what those patients look like that are on that stuff. It is wild and crazy. So I called my, I don't know how to, it's like my wife's godfather's son-in-law. I don't know what that makes me. But he's a cool guy. We're kindred spirits for sure. Cool dude. He's the lieutenant for the police department in Destin, Florida, which is the Gulf of Florida, South Florida. And South Florida is where they report in the media that they're having these problems. So I called him up a few months back, and I said, his name is Sean, and I said, hey, Sean, man, I just got to ask you, the media keeps hitting me up on this Flakka stuff, and I don't know if this is a sample size of 3 or a sample size of, 50, like what's the reality on this? And he's an officer, right? He's like, dude, we're dealing with that on a daily basis. It's wrecking our community right now. And so that concerns me because when a drug trend starts, in a big way that's wreckage, it will start to travel. It will seep and it will leak and it will move to different communities, right? We saw ecstasy in the late 90s be a European thing. and then it was a Bay Area thing and a New York thing, and then it just kind of seeped and made its way everywhere. Geez, methamphetamine back in the Claire's day and my day was like California, you know, like in a 200-mile radius of where we are right now, was the biggest supplier of the nation. And then all of a sudden, you know, then it was Missouri came out with super labs, and then you know, everyone else was doing it. But it does travel. These drugs do travel. So if you want to be in front of the curve, look at Flocka and pray to whoever your God is that does not show up in our community, because that will be a wreck.
Does it talk about how they make it or where it comes from or any of that on the videos?
If you go onto YouTube, you will see a lot of interviews on on that.
So is it a homemade thing, or just last question on that?
You know, I don't know on that, because I forgot like the exact. Like,
Okay.
yeah.
Does this come from China?
Oh.
Combination of cocaine. I lost it.
You've prompted my memory though, and you're absolutely right on. And then what'll happen is then our government will figure out what chemicals they're using and then smash.
Cocaine and meth. It causes euphoria and mild hallucinations. And induces seizures, paranoia, illusions. So, yeah, it's
Right.
very dangerous.
That's the one thing too, like I just want to make a comment on that, is when we start talking about it as a community, it gets out there.
Right.
And then before you know it, somebody's gonna figure it out and bring it over here. You know,
Right.
it's like we bring it into our existence the more that we talk about it, so.
Well, a lot of these drugs are really ran by organized crime, and it's a multi-million-dollar business. So back in the 90s when we had the ecstasy problem, and ecstasy was $25 to $40 a pill,
Oh, yeah.
whether you got a single stack or double stack, or if you were able to get your hands on true Molly, because they refer to ecstasy today as Molly, but Molly back then represented true MDMA pure uncut, which was hard to find unless you were in the Bay Area, and you were going to pay $50 a pill for that. So, where was I going with that?
About talking about it in the community, it's gangster run.
Yeah, thank you. So that stuff back then, you know how much it cost to make a pill? 20 cents to make a pill.
Wow.
So when you invest, so, you know, these pill machines produced 250,000 pills a week, and it was the Israeli mafia that was running that out of the Netherlands. And so it's highly organized crime rings that are running these different things. And so that's going to be the same with the Flocka, it's the same with the meth, it's the same with the heroin. It's highly territorial for gangs, actually. There's a lot of money in it. So my bias, and I want to talk about heroin and drugs a little bit. And I wrote an article that was nationally published on this paradigm shift. So I'm going to talk about that. Some of you have heard it before, and it might be a little thought-provoking for some of you now. But that's cool, because we need to stretch and grow. So when we think about what drives addiction, we don't know. That's the truth. So we like to live in a world of certainty because it makes us feel safe and secure. But the truth is we don't know. The reality is if you want to know why someone's addicted, it's the same as trying to figure out why someone's depressed. Well, why is that person depressed? Is it a gene? Is it the environment? Why does that person have bipolar? Why does that person have anxiety? Why does that person have access to hard to sit with personality disorder? It's not that simple. Everyone's story is quite different. Some have genetic predisposition and vulnerability. I would say that a lot of people that have the genetic predisposition actually have a genetic vulnerability to a stress response, that their body doesn't manage stress that well, and they get affect dysregulated quite easily. So that's one model. If we can turn it to channel 2, that would be channel 2's model. We can live on channel 2 all day long. Channel 1 would have been the disease concept of addiction model, right? And that's great, because I believe in the disease concept in addition to all the others, because it's a little bit different for everybody. And the disease concept of addiction came from Dr. E.M. Jelnick's work in the 1950s, who found that alcoholics, when they used over time, there was 31 symptoms, and they would progress. When you take statistics and research methodology, there's something that's called a shotgun blast pattern. When you look at data, there's like a couple here, a couple there, a couple there, a couple there. Jelnic's stuff from 1 to 31 did not have a shotgun blast pattern of I have symptom 1, 2, and 9, 18, and 23, and 24. And I've used this a lot with adult addicts. It is 1 through 12, and then it stops. 1 through 19, and then it stops. So there was a very clear linear progression. So they took that data, matched it to the American Medical Association's criteria for a disease, which was the three-pronged deal of if it has symptoms, if it's progressive, and if left untreated can be fatal, that's what a disease is. You know, and so then that's where the disease concept really came from, you know, back in the day. There's also, and this is what I talk about too, because I don't have a lot of control over someone's disease, and I don't have a lot of control over someone's predisposition and genetics and helping them, but I can with coping skills and other things. But the other thing that we're starting to gleam onto more, and it's not about trying to bash our early childhood experience or bash parents or whatever, but there is something to it if you grow up, and the research is showing it more, in family systems that are traumatizing, shaming, neglecting, wanting you to present as if you look great and we look great, and I care about your fashion and your grades and your sports scores, but I don't even know who you are on the inside. I do not even know what it's like for you to be you in your own skin on a daily basis on the, you know, age 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is. I deal with a lot of clients that they're just all alone. Like there's no internal world of the caregiver connecting and seeing and attuning to the internal world of the client that I'm working with. And so that's a miss, and that in early childhood can be a trauma. So what we know today about early childhood shame when it's used as a weapon, early childhood misattunement, which isn't even seeming abusive the way I grew up. You don't give me whatever, I can move on, you know. But my organization was dismissive avoidant in the household that I grew up in. What we know is that when the brain is growing and developing, it's projecting dopamine from the nucleus accumbens, ventral tegmental, and on up. And when, in early childhood, when there is shame, and shame used as a weapon, and even some research about misattunement, it activates programmed cell death or apoptosis of that system. And what we know is the peak of any intoxication is a dopamine release, and actually an opiate release as well. And when we look at the opiate system, heroin, opiate system, and we get past what we learned in undergrad, which was it regulates pain, what we see is that it is the neurobiological underpinning to the core underpinning to attachment and connection. It's the core underpinning, and there's oxytocin that's there as well, but the opiate system is happening, it's firing. When we sit with clients, and I've shared this before, and we're in that space, or you have people from your people, you know your people, that you can share and open up and be you, and when you guys are connecting, it energizes you, and you feel seen, and you feel felt, and you feel like there's nowhere else I'd rather be. Have you guys had that experience with people, clients, something, and you're like, wow, this is awesome? Mm-hmm. That is your opiate system firing as a result of a relationship. Faster than drugs and with less side effects. And so when I'm in that space with a client, and I'm like, I'm having this experience, are you having this experience? Yes, we're having that experience. And I asked them, would you rather learn how to stay in this, you know, or initiate relationships and cultivate them and maintain them and negotiate them to where you can maintain something like this, which is a high level of functioning, I get it, to have this in your life, or would you rather go use heroin or OxyContin or whatever it is? They all say, I'd rather have this in my life. They all say it. So, not that everyone comes from trauma history, misattunement history, but we got to figure out which channel we are on for each individual client. Genetic vulnerability, stress vulnerability, early attachment, shame and trauma, big T trauma, abuse, molest. And we know that when there's big T trauma going on, that it overly fires in the locus coeruleus of the brain, locus coeruleus, way down low, is producing noradrenaline, which helps regulate breathing and heart rate and other things. You know, it's like, more our primitive self, our biological functioning, let's just say. So it's overproducing, when people have had big T trauma, it's overproducing noradrenaline. And that leaves people in a state of hypervigilance, hyperarousal. In a novel situation, I even get higher, faster than other people. And then, and we all go up in a novel situation. And then when I leave that situation, everyone comes down, but it takes me longer to come down, and I don't come down as low. And I have no parasympathetic tone. And what we know is left untreated over time, that leads to anxiety, and to depression, and to immune system issues. So we're really talking about a health issue. But that locus coeruleus overproducing creates that state. And then guess what happens when we use heroin, OxyContin, Norco, opiate drugs? It builds a wall right there in front of that locus coeruleus. So now that noradrenaline can't penetrate and bust through that wall. That is a mechanistic understanding of self-medicating right there. A relationship affected my neurochemistry, and now I use a drug to then try to repair it, when in fact I need healthy relationships to try to repair. But I don't know how to do healthy relationships, but because my personality structure, affect regulation ability, and my sense of approach relationships or avoid, initiative or doubt, or seeing people as a resource and helpful, or I need to be a do-it-yourselfer, was all organized. And now I don't know how to then do relationships to activate the system. And then I use an opiate drug and builds that wall there, and now I feel maybe the best I've felt in my entire life. And then we come along and we're like, hey man, you need to get off the opiates, dude. Like, it's affecting work and relationships and school and health and on and on. And that's cool. That's what we got to do. We got to dislodge someone's relationship to intoxication so as to stop the consequences in their life, so as to open up their capacity for other relationships to activate the system that I talked about earlier, where there's nowhere else we'd rather be sitting but in a relationship that's activating those systems. So what happens is they stop using, so now we have the locus coeruleus firing noradrenaline, and the dam comes down, the dam being heroin or OxyContin comes falling down, and then they're flooded with noradrenaline. And then they have withdrawal. Puking, headaches, sweating, muscle aches, vomiting. It's hell, you know, and that's where you see why people continue that use. Because I don't even want to get high, I just don't want to feel like this. You know, major flu-like symptoms for a long time. And thank God for Suboxone, you know, and to help these people through not just the withdrawal, whatever on the withdrawal. And that's how that medicine gets used wrong. Is a doctor puts them on Suboxone for 7 days to get them past the withdrawal symptoms and says, go get some outpatient counseling, you're off the medicine now. And that doesn't, bye Marion, bye Claire. And that doesn't help these folks because they have too many extra mu and kappa opioid receptors now that are starving and lending itself to the preoccupation of themselves and want more. So anyway, there's a lot said there, and that's interpersonal neurobiology, by the way, and that is how relationships are affecting the development of neurobiology or regulating it in real time. Activating someone's sense of relationships, trust versus mistrust, initiative versus doubt, approach versus avoidance. We're not born that way. We have temperament, but we get organized really early on if people feel safe, if people are a resource. And how we think about ourselves, that is completely organized, you know. Our ability to deal with affect, completely organized. There can be some that are born with some vulnerability. So when I look at what drives addiction, and by the way, I see addiction and mental health as all the same illness. It's been carved out as separate things because of funding, because of money, but it is all, in my bias, I've been talking about my biases, right? So my biases, not yours, but my bias, it's all the same monster. And also, I don't see a separation between relationships, neurobiology, and psychology. Because right now, our biology and neurobiology and internal working model of how we see ourselves and others, and our cognitive spin into distortion or into it's okay, or I don't even have to put energy into spin, is happening all at once. I mean, if I started walking up to you guys and asking you questions, it would all start to play out for yourself. If you have an upbringing and you have a history of relationships that are completely safe, especially with 45-year-old bald white guys, completely safe, and then my sense of how I was treated in school and academically felt good, and I know who I am, and I'm integrated, and I have a good affect regulation system, and I come up to you and I start asking you questions about addiction, you're not going to have a bunch of anxiety when I walk up to you. You're going to be like, bring it on, John. I got that all day. Or maybe more neutral. But if you have a history of you were shamed because of school, you were shamed by people, you fear relationships, it's in your implicit memory, in your right hippocampus, implicit memory, organized early on, just me stepping forward to you is going to activate anxiety. So everyone's got a different perception of this elephant. If I'm good, if I'm bad, if I'm whatever. But that's organized. That's not genetic. And that's organized. So when I'm looking at, again, the way I see addiction is addiction and mental health are one. And in my opinion, through reading through Bessel van der Kolk, Alan Shore, Bruce Perry MD, Dan Siegel, Louis Cozolino, the list goes on and on, Ram Dass, Richard Alpert, different ways of thinking is that it's an affect regulation disorder. That good mental health is that my emotions can be contained in this box. And I can regulate. So if John is walking up to my table right now, I could stay with however this feels in this box. But some of us where mental health disorders and addictive disorders they're outside of the box. So they're hijacked too quick, flooded too quick, bottom up hijacking too quick. So they're reacting, acting out, risk-taking, yelling, abuse, violence, whatever it is on this side. The bottom of that box is disassociated from, repressed, split off, partition, numb, avoidant. And so what are we doing for those people? We're trying to get them in the box, trying to build them up. Like, hey, you need more sympathetic tone. For these people, you need more parasympathetic tone. Let's get you in the box. You got this emotion. Let's pause, reflect, think about it. Why don't we do some meditation and yoga to grow your orbital medial prefrontal cortex a little bit more behind your right eye. I know that sounds like big, but there's something to it. I mean, that's what's happening when we're doing meditative practices and yoga practices. Yoga is clearly shown to increase GABA aminobutyric acid, which helps people deal with stress and anxiety. And I'm already saying stress is the enemy, to mental health and addictive disorders, affect regulation, dysregulation. So when we're looking at, from my view, and that's what my book's about, this addiction and mental health as one, relationship, psychology, and neurobiology as one, but there's really not a lot of separation because it's all in the flow, in the mix, as an affect regulation disorder, then we have to ask ourselves, well, how do we get out? How can we have it or how can we don't? And I've kind of been touching on that stuff as I've gone. But it's genetics and it is early development. And so if we're going to understand opiate addiction, we have to do good developmental histories. If we're going to understand someone's depression, good developmental histories. What was it like in your family? How did they express feelings? How did they negotiate pain, anger, frustration, needs, and other things? Did your parents feel soothing and resourceful? How was it for their parents? Because this could be a 100-year-old issue. This isn't about them. This could be a 100-year-old issue in the family. We can see where these patterns are generationally passed on. So that's the way I like to think about and assess people's mental health and addictive disorder. Instead of just having a silo of one size fits all, because we don't get good outcomes that way. We get the same results that aren't as well. So the article that I had published was the paradigm shift And so here's the paradigm shift, and here's why I titled this presentation From Heroin to Marijuana, which is backwards and confusing, I get it. And I already said this earlier, when I polled a lot of people, a lot of clinicians, some CSAM medical doctors, some psychologists, interventionists, my own program, to look at, what's the rhetoric is in the media today, and that is people have opiate addiction because doctors are over-prescribing pain meds. And I'm like, yeah, that hasn't been my experience since my career of 20 years now. It's that people were already addicted. There are some that, they got the surgeries and whatever, took the pain meds and got addicted. But the significant 95%, they were already addicted to a pathological relationship to intoxication, and then just here became the new substance, wherever they got it, a doctor or on the streets or from the medicine chest, and then it took off. So why this paradigm shift is that the problem, in my professional opinion, is addicts don't hit bottom until the system hits bottom. And that's just how it goes. When everyone around that addict says, I've had enough, that's when the addict has to start looking at it. So the addict's never going to have the experience of it's a problem until the system has the experience that it's a problem. So the system sadly needs to recognize it as a problem first. So now, after all these years, here's what's going on from our government parents. Opiates are a problem. Well, the bias and the truth is that you guys have been subscribing to that drug bias as well. So let's just do a quick exercise to illustrate my point. I want you to just close your eyes, and I want you to think about someone that you love a lot. So for me, like my daughter, my son, I got 5 kids, so I better not discriminate, especially because it's on video. So all the kids and my wife, and think about someone you really love and you're protective of. Who do you want to protect? And you get a call while you're in this room, in this inward moment, and the police call you and they say, we just busted this person at the park drinking alcohol. What's that feel like? We just busted that person at the park smoking marijuana. What's that feel like? And the next call comes in, we just busted them at the park with Vicodin. What's that feel like? Viscerally. We just busted them at the park with heroin. What does that feel like? You can open your eyes when you're ready. But do you see the drug bias? I'm telling you, the name of those dang drugs is an absolute illusion. You don't even need to care about the name of the drugs. They mean not a lot. They really don't. The illness is not about the drug. The illness is the pathological relationship to intoxication. And we've enabled this heroin problem by your visceral reaction. That if you got that call for heroin, some of you would have been like, I'm out. I'm going to go get my kid or whoever that person is I want to protect. Marijuana, well, how many more minutes until this lecture's over? I mean, see, I'm real. You guys, I know your body, right? Because I've done this for thousands of clinicians, and everyone speaks to it when we have a lot more time to talk about it. So addicts don't hit bottom until the system hits bottom. And I already said that these opiate addicts already had addiction before heroin showed up. So where were we when we knew they were using marijuana and alcohol for the very first time? How did we hit bottom and say, dude, this is like heroin in my opinion, you're going to need some help now? Or did we go, listen, Johnny, I got to tell you, I used when I was a kid, and kids will be kids, boys will be boys, it's teenage years, it's the phase of life, it's a rite of passage. Don't do it again, don't let it get out of control. Yeah, you're not having that conversation around heroin with the kid, are you? No. You shouldn't have it with marijuana or alcohol with the kid. I spoke to a group of psychiatrists. Oh, let me say one more thing. Where I'm saying that you have a drug bias and the name of the drug's an illusion, what happens when your clients get off of their heroin? Because I've dealt with a lot of heroin addicts. Are they clean? They go to Xanax. You get them off Xanax, they go to marijuana and alcohol. You get them off of marijuana or alcohol, they go to the other one. When you have marijuana addicts and you get them off of their drug, they go to alcohol more. So because they're not hooked on marijuana, we don't have marijuana addicted clients hooked on marijuana, they're hooked on intoxication. The heroin addicts are hooked on intoxication. They don't care about that drug. It's their favorite flavor at Baskin-Robbins, but if they go into Baskin-Robbins today and their flavor is gone, they are not walking out there without a scoop of a different flavor. That's the game. That's the illness. We have to see it as all the same. It's the illness. So I think our industry and us as family members, we have to own our own role in this heroin epidemic if we have enabled teens to use drugs, marijuana or alcohol more than one day. The drugs are all the same. Yeah, we get caught up in the 5% difference, but 95% of all the drugs are the same. When I assessed the client yesterday, clinicians, I want you to help me out. What I learned from this client is that since they started using, all their money goes to it, their friends have changed because of it, they don't care about sports or school anymore, they're lying to everybody, they're having close calls with the police officers, they're stealing things to pay for their use. What drug are they using? Significantly trained clinicians. I'm not trying to shame you, but I just want to make sure you're like, I'm trying to be with me on this. What drug is that client using? Alcohol. Doesn't matter. What I just named were the symptoms of abuse and addiction. And it doesn't discriminate. That's the symptoms for heroin addiction. That's the symptoms for marijuana addiction. That's the symptom for alcohol addiction. Xanax bars addiction, which is a big deal right now too. It's all the same illness. Some progress a little faster than others. Some you're not going to overdose on. But we have to start seeing this as the same illness, marijuana and heroin, because that's the paradigm that needs to shift. It's a pathological relationship to intoxication, not marijuana. So if you think it's related to marijuana, take your marijuana addict, get them off of marijuana and see what happens. Start drug testing them, see what happens. They will be on YouTube in a minute and calling all their friends to figure out, how do I beat a drug screen? And now that they've figured out, you figured it out, and marijuana is absolutely gone, do you think they're going to be sober? No. They're going to switch to the next drug or that next flavor at the ice cream shop. That's my bias. That's been my bias has grown from clinical experience sitting with N equals thousands of clients. So when do we refer to treatment then? If we bust a kid, our own children, or a client who's 12 years old, because the average age of first intoxication is 12 years old, and we find out that they've used for the first time. And I will stipulate that it's the very first time. We don't have to game, and I just say that because usually when someone comes to the door of my office, they're like, Johnny got busted at school, we got a call, it was the first time using it in the boys' room, then we sit with Johnny, and Johnny's been at it for a long time. Yeah, I haven't really had any one-timers. It always plays out to be more. But the family thinks it's one time. But the family's doing a good job to be early in the game to say, let's go see somebody and get some help. Once we know that something has occurred, we need to send them to an addiction specialist right away. Now, I don't think that those kids, because it's going to be more likely kids than adults. I'm going to say kids, because most adult addicts have juvenile onset addiction and not adult onset addiction. And there are completely differences between juvenile onset and adult onset, which I get into in my 7-hour talks that many of you have been to. But Johnny needs to see someone, because at a minimum, and let me ask you this. Now, you remember that person that you had in your mind and in your heart that you're protective of at the park? Would you rather have this for them? That they try to figure it out, you try to just set limits on it, and then it comes back in 2 years or 6 months, try to set limits on it, talk about it, and then it's 2 years, and then 3 years, you're like, all right, we need to get some help, because it keeps popping up, right? That's one thing, and then all of a sudden you find out that there's a big pathological relationship to intoxication going on, and if they can't succeed, they're probably going to need inpatient treatment, which is $25,000 the first time, and most people need 3 times of treatment, inpatient treatment. That's average. I think we got programs that do a way better job than that. So a lot of my clients with one time in treatment, maybe 2 inpatient treatment, or hopefully my insurance covers it. But here's what I'm saying we need to do, because it's easier to prevent symptoms than it is to reverse symptoms. Name an illness. It's easier to prevent those symptoms. Once this illness kicks in and we see symptoms, it's easier to start to treat it and prevent the progression of it than to wait for it to get to stage 4 and try to reverse it. We are waiting for stage 4 and trying to reverse it. That's the model that many of us are in. And that's why we need this paradigm shift. So I'm like this, would you rather it play out like that over time, there's risk involved, and then it costs a lot of money to get treatment, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, whatever. And what I'm saying is once we identify, they need to see someone immediately, because that kid needs to know how it's gonna, like, they need to be assessed, they need to get educated on how it affects them neurobiologically, relationally, how it stunts growth, socially, every different way. The family needs at least 6 hours of education to get up to speed on what's going on in the current culture of teen drug use. They need to know about the common denial and enabling that parents get caught up in and do, which is then participating in the illness and not helping the illness. And if we get that kid to get educated, and not in group with other drug addicts, because we don't want that. We want individual and family sessions. And so we educate that kid, session 1, drug use history, build a relationship, start some education, session 2, some more biopsychosocial assessment, because maybe there's other underlying issues that are going on. We need to know about that. Or hurts, pains, sadnesses, and angers. And then let's just say there's not. So then there's session 3, more education. And then we start to explore with them, how has your chemical use already created consequences in your life? School. Have you got high before school, retired at school, didn't do your homework because you got high, got a reputation at school for being high, whatever. How did you pay for it? So how's it affected money, school, health, friendships, motivation, social life? There's a lot of areas that need to be explored. And then we want the family to do the same thing. They write up the intervention letter without lectures, judgments, or put down. But Johnny, here's how I've seen it affect our relationship now. Got mistrust, you've been grounded, you don't get allowance anymore, whatever that is. How it's affected school, but it can't be guesses, it needs to be accurate. And then also the family puts together a home contract of clear expectations around no use, drug testing, and all of that, and then some family session to process all that stuff. I just described a 6 to 8 week treatment plan. That's not that long. And no one's doing that. Very rare are families calling. Very rare are we getting calls from the hospital. Very rare from schools. Very rare from the coach. When in fact we know that that's how it needs to be. Is to get the help sooner, prevent the symptoms from progressing, than trying to deal with it at stage 4 and reversing the symptoms. You guys with me on that? Any thoughts on that? It's a lot to take in, right? So that's a lot. Dang, I gotta think of the drugs as different or as all the same. That's relationship to Jennifer.
Yeah, so what do you recommend because marijuana is seen as medicinal? It's legal in certain states. Now, high school, the high school my husband teaches that. It's down the road, and all families are using and normalizing the kids are coming to high school high because they've done it with their parents the night before. And so it's completely normalized. So what would you recommend in this situation?
So that's what we're now up against, right? And so it's been enabled for so long. I mean, in 2010, with the data that I follow out of the University of Michigan that's been tracking the trend since 1975, 2010 was the first time when what we found was for first time use, the drug was marijuana, when it always had been alcohol and nicotine. But 2010 was because of all the ad campaigns to try to legalize it, recommend medicinal use it, whatever. So now, the drug is absolutely different today. And I've learned more in the last 2 months about marijuana than I have in my career. I mean, I know a lot about it and how it affects the brain and different things. But let me see if I even have it in my slide. So all of you guys, let me just show you a couple marijuana things. How many of you guys used marijuana back in your youth? Come on, don't be shy. Right? Yeah, right. So I was addicted to 5% THC, by the way. and that was in the 80s. 5% THC, this is the THC. In 85, see I still got junkie pride, right? Because it said like under 4%. And I'm like, it was like 5% when I was using it in the 80s, but the data is like right here. Like, it's like, no, John, you might be wrong about that. But this is the trend from government seized marijuana, and it's held at what's called the vault at the University of Mississippi. And this is where most of our research comes from on marijuana potency. And what we know is that, and I'm going to fast forward, this is the marijuana that people are using today. It's 26% THC. I was addicted to 5. 26, there's withdrawal symptoms, loss of appetite, problem sleeping, anxiety. And this is what, and you can buy it on Craigslist, that's right there. This is what everyone's doing now. Wax, dabs, and butter. If you know a teenager, I don't care if you think they've used or not, I want you to ask that teenager tonight, your own children, if they're in high school, how many kids at your campus do you think are using wax, dabs, or butter? And for all of you sitting in this room that are like, I don't even know what wax, dabs, and butter is, you're going to get an education. Wax, dabs, kids are not doing smoking weed anymore. They're doing oils and edibles and wax, dabs, and butter, which is 73% THC.
Or they do both.
Or both. This hospital has seen plenty of kids have come through the door because they had a psychotic break and a panic attack on these oils and high THC concentrates of wax, dabs, and buds or edibles, or just the oil sublingual because they want to take it and be like super on the down low. And certainly Center for Psychiatry has seen plenty of them. I've had plenty of clients in our program, and this is the increasing trend we're seeing in mental health, is that this drug is totally kicking in psychosis for people now. One of the things that I've learned recently, in the last month or so, was about when it's taking sublingual or as edibles, and I've learned this from a doctor and in case studies, is that it takes like 45 minutes for that stuff to kick in. Now, do you guys remember when you were partying? Now, what would have happened if you drank some alcohol and it wasn't working for the first 20 minutes? Or you're smoking weed back in the day and it wasn't working for the first 20 minutes. So now I'm a kid in 2016 and I take some oil and I put it under my tongue so no one can detect it in school, or I take it in an edible. You guys might have a picture of some edibles. I don't. Sorry, I'm all over the place, I know it. So what happens is, in 15 minutes, they're like this. I don't feel anything. So then they take more. It's been a half hour. I don't feel anything. And then, boom. That's what happens for them. I think I'm going to pass out. Oh my gosh, I think I'm going to die. I think I see the doorway to the other side. You know, and this is the experience that clients are reporting to us. And then I see interviews across the country, this is what's happening. And so, I think we're going to do it, we're going to see more of this. The kids on campus are going to see more of this. The parents will soon see more of this. It's kind of like I was saying when we legalized, when Colorado did its thing, I'm like, give them 10 years and they're going to figure out how to unwind what they wound up. How do we back out of the situation we got ourselves into? And they're already trying to figure that out because they're having a lot of problems in Colorado, and I could email you data on that. And so I'm not on a tangent, but like I saw in the late 90s with ecstasy, when ecstasy dominated my program, and it was all over the news, it was all across the country, it was expensive, everyone was doing it. Our clients were calling their friends E-tards, E for ecstasy, E-tards, they're E-tarded. I had addicted clients seeing their friends using ecstasy going, they got a problem, you know, while they're in their own problem. And then they saw their friends have depression and anxiety from it, and there was a lot of more education about it, more research on it. I think that's going to happen in the next couple of years on this, is that it's going to take more kids seeing their friends have psychotic breaks, or kids having panic attacks and going, I made it through it, I'm good, you know, and parents learning more about it. And there's a DVD that I recommend for everyone, and it's titled The Other Side of Cannabis by Jody Belcher. And it is up to date with all this information from data, interviews with neuropsych people, neuroscientists at Harvard and NIDA and other institutions.
Jody
Belcher, and you can buy her DVD. Yeah, it's just amazing, and it's everything that I'm talking about that we've been seeing clinically. So sadly, Jennifer, I think we need to continue to do more education out there for parent nights in the schools, but then it's hard to get parents to show up, because I do a lot of parent nights, and it's hard to get parents to show up. But it's going to take something like the ecstasy thing, where these kids start seeing it as a problem. It happened with OxyContin too. Like after about 3 years of OxyContin use, there were kids like, I smoking weed every day, doing whatever the drug there, but I'm not going to touch OxyContin because I see it affecting my friends. And that's when you start to see the trends then start to change. So I think it's going to have to play out a little bit more. And like I said, Colorado's already dealing with kids being hospitalized a lot. DUIs are up 300% that are marijuana related. Psychosis, it's a problem, and it's not like, oh, and the age of kids using younger, Colorado has the most youngest kids using right now. And the younger you are when you use, the more likely you're going to get addiction.
John, what is that age? Do we know what that is?
I don't know over there what's going on. I know it's still 12 here, and that's not earth-shaking that it's 12 here. It's been 12 since 1995. So that's not like, so that's 6th grade summer, and that kind of scares you, right? It's been that way for some time. What's changed? The potency's changed. The potency's changed. The availability's changed. You can go on, kid can go on Craigslist right now. Man, Shane Stamus at my program pulled out an app the other day in supervision and said, check this out, John. You can, there's this app, and people will deliver marijuana to where you are right there. And you can watch them en route like Uber. Coming to deliver. Have you ever used the Uber app? And you're like, this is what I need, this is what I want to ride to. It's that way. You know, the sex addicts had that app for sex addicts, quite some time. I'm at this hotel, I want to have sex, this is what I look like, instant message me right now, let's meet up and have sex. That's an app that's there. Now they have this for marijuana delivery. So that's what it's a trip. So, the pendulum, I'm telling you guys, this is my prediction, will swing back the other way. Colorado, and give it a few more years, is going to be like, how do we get out of this situation? We got ourselves in a mess. And it is the biggest uncontrolled human subjects scientific study you guys are going to ever have in your lifetime. Because we had great human studies in the 70s in social psychology, Milgram, Philip Zimbardo, and some of that stuff. And then all of a sudden, they saw the effects it had on some of those subjects in those studies, and they were like this. We need to form human subjects committees, boards on campuses, and really, you have to ask for big-time approval before you even implement a survey. Like even a survey needs to be evaluated and approved. So this is an unregulated study right now. So we're just gonna have to keep our eyes on it and see how it plays out. Marijuana specifically, just while we're on it, neurobiologically, interrupts the development, because the brains are still developing until the early 20s. It interrupts the development of the serotonin system. So you might think dopamine system, dopamine is going to be affected too, but it's really target specific to serotonin. And serotonin, as you know, has a lot of functions. We know it as a mood stabilizer. It regulates appetite, sleep, digestion, mood, anger, impulsivity. It's a big braking system in our system. We think of the prefrontal cortex as the thing that tells us to stop before we act. Prefrontal cortex for sure. But the neurochemical that does the same thing, serotonin. It says pause before we act. So we got this reblooming of neurotransmitters during the teenage years, and then part of that is they're supposed to prune off some of that and develop a braking system for some of the impulsivity. And then if they're smoking weed, it wrecks all that development, and the brain stops producing its own serotonin and starts to rely on it coming from the environment, because the brain always wants homeostasis of any neurotransmitter. Too much of serotonin is really bad for you. deficiency, really bad for you. You know, kids that are using Xanax and alcohol, that affects the GABA aminobutyric acid system, which regulates stress, tension, and anxiety for us on a regular basis. Well, if they're using Xanax bars, Valium, and alcohol consistently, the brain's not going to produce GABA. During this developmental archaeology construction time, it's still developing. So they're telling their brains, yeah, I want you to develop in this way where you're not producing these chemicals because I'm going to give them to my brain all the time. And then at 20-something years old, the brain's like, cool, we're done. We've 3D molded your brain based on the environment you live in. Here you go. And if God wipes alcohol and marijuana off the face of the earth, their brain chemistry is out of balance. Their affect regulation is out of balance. And then we have a lot of health issues, mental health issues, addiction issues. I mean, we know right now if any kid who's got a substance use disorder has 2 to 5 times more likely to have a mental health disorder in their life. So again, back to, I don't know, what time do we have to get out of here? 1:30. Oh, we still got some time. Oh, good. So why my title, From Heroin to Marijuana, kind of thought-provoking is, we need to intervene with the marijuana and alcohol stuff as if it were heroin, and then we don't have to deal with the heroin stuff going forward. It's really like a cause now versus a discipline. You know, like that's the difference. But I think between, and I have my CADC and LCSW both, but like the CADC community is like passionate cause about recovery and addiction. MFT, LCSW, PhD is more the discipline, the science about the issue, and I'm a little bit of like both, you know. And I think like I know my purpose in life is to do what I'm doing, so I'm grateful for that I get to be connected to that. But so for me, it's like a cause, and trying to do the best we can based on what we know is work and what the new research is, and not having a silo approach to thinking about addiction. You know, to have multiple ways of thinking about it. And like I said, it's the same for depression. But we are in a heroin crisis. We were in an ecstasy crisis. Trying to think of any other big fat trend crises. But 95% of those people were already addicted because of marijuana and alcohol before they got addicted to opiates. And that's the thing to know. So if we can stop and intervene earlier than with the other substances and get them into treatment faster and sooner. And this article on the paradigm shift that I published is on my website. If you go under newsletters and you scroll down somewhere close to the bottom is the article that says the paradigm shift or whatever. Yes, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so I deal with a lot of families that are heavy using marijuana and they have in the home infants, small children. So what's that secondhand smoke use?
You know, I don't know that we know what the secondhand smoke's doing to those children just yet, but what we know is that the brains and minds are physically organized in the context of the brains and minds that are around it. My caregivers and my system around me, the way their minds are constructed, is going to construct my mind. On an affect regulation basis, on a lot of perceptions and bias basis. I remember actually, there's a lot of ways with mirror neurons. So mirror neurons take on the states of those that are around us when we're in more critical periods of life early to be primed to receive that. And this is just a superficial example. I remember my son Dylan was really little and we lived out in the country and there was coyotes jumped over like an acre away circling some sheep, and then I went and I was like, oh, there's some coyotes, we gotta chase them off. So he's like, coyotes, and he's just looking at me to see, Dad, what is my evaluation of what coyotes means? What's that supposed to be? Right? If I'm going to argue with my wife, let's say back then, my kids are going to be like, let's see how we do arguments. And that's their capacity then. So they network, their brain's neural network to what's going on in the environment, and all those other neurons fall away. And then so their capacity falls away. So if they have a family system that's smoking marijuana all the time and has a favorable attitude around it, it's likely their kids are going to use. So that's, we know. The other piece though we know is that that marijuana use is going to get in the way of that caregiver's capacity to regulate affective states in other healthier ways, like turning to relationships to talk about stress, to talk about what their needs are, to be a partner, because relationships are one of the biggest affect regulated systems we have. We don't self-regulate as kids. We have to turn to caregivers to regulate. We are co-regulated, and in our adult life we're still co-regulated. If I have a client that's dysregulated and I'm like, let's do yoga, they're going to get regulated. If I say, let's go for a walk, they're going to get regulated. If I'm like, let's read some inspirational spiritual stuff, they're going to get regulated. But guess what? In the absence of a relationship, that stuff will habituate in like a week and a half. Like how much exercise, yoga, and spiritual stuff can you do until you're like, it's not working anymore. I need relationships. So they're not learning how to utilize relationships for their own development is an easy prediction for me. So, but yeah, I mean, that's been going on for generations with alcohol, you know. Yeah. Other questions? Real quick on this, so I've talked about addiction as a pathological relationship to intoxication. And that's the illness, man. How many of you sat with clients and are like this? I can quit anytime they have consequences going on from their addiction. And they're like, I can quit anytime I want to. I just don't want to. Like, man, that's the illness right there though, right? Like that problems are occurring and you're like cool with it, you know? That the upside potential of being high outweighs that you just lost your car or your wife or your career. I did an intervention, and I've talked about this before just because it's a, you know, it's just a big, makes the point. I did an intervention for the Kansas City Chiefs once, a player that they had when Mike White was the coach. And I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I don't know football. And on that day, I kind of wished I did, because there was like the head coach from Stanford there, or Berkeley, or wherever, and then that guy was there, and then White, and all these people, and I'm like, I feel like I'm missing out on something that other people would really appreciate. But maybe it's a good thing, right? Because then I could be more objective. We did this intervention, which actually was on an Easter many years ago, and it was at a little room at a hotel. So they thought, the guy thought he was going to that hotel room for a brunch with his family, and we did the intervention. Everyone goes around and talks about how God broke the mold and made you very special, and special in my life, and special as a person. In these very concrete, specific ways, just about you. And then the other side of the coin was, and here are the consequences and the hurts, pains, sadnesses, and angers that we've had in specific examples without judgment about how your use has affected you or our relationship or the team or what have you. And then when it was all, you know, the wife at the end is like, you know, hey man, you got to get into treatments. We were recommending Springbrook, Hazelden, and Springbrook, Oregon. And at the end, the guy's like this. Oh, and the wife's like this. If you don't go, you're going to walk home from this hotel, by the way. And so he's like this. I need to think about it, right? I need to think about it. So I just told him, you ain't got a lot to think about. It's really easy. Is your relationship to intoxication more valuable and important than your relationship to your wife and your team and your career and your future? That's all you got to think about. Which relationship is more important? Intoxication or real relationships? That's it. That's all it comes down to. So we didn't do high processing. It's just, this is it. He didn't go into treatment. Bummer. That's what this is. Experimentation and misuse are like frequencies of use for people, but when we look at it as a relationship, and not to minimize it, these people will let go when consequences occur, because they do value their family more than the drug. They do value school, relationship, health, future goals, their money in their pocket, their freedom. So if they have a choice, they're like this, yeah, I'm out, right? When people get into abuse and addiction, it all flips. it flips. Drugs is now my #1 priority in my life, and family's at the bottom, in career, school, and sports, and all those clean friends that I used to have, and healthy activities. I know I used to be good at the piano, got into addiction. I can't do a thing on the piano anymore because I lost, I took too much time off. So that's the illness. These people are like this. So these people quit using. You catch them and you express concern and set limits, they stop using. These people are like this. I don't want to stop, or I will stop. BS. They go on YouTube and I'm like, how do I beat a drug screen? What other drugs are like marijuana that aren't detectable? Oh, K2 spice. Perfect. Let me get some K2 spice. And then everyone figures out that game. And then they're like, dang it, maybe I'll just drink more. Right? And then people come into the system and say, hey, stop using or we're done. And a lot of people do get clean because of those interventions. Legal system works the best, employers works the second best, and families at the bottom. And sadly, that's, if you're going to predict, that's the legal system's #1, work is #2, and the family is #3. So we're not ranking really well. Most intervention models are ran with families, and so we do want to pull in not the legal system, but the employer if we can. So does that make sense about it's all about the relationship to intoxication. I can go DSM-5 all day long and all kinds of ASI about the symptoms of abuse and addiction, but the reality is just keep it simple. It's a pathological relationship. So if they're making excuses for why they're continuing to use, there's the illness, which might turn out to be heroin, might turn out to be something else as time travels on. Yes?
It's kind of off topic, but my kids, when they ask the question, you know, like, you can tell if somebody drinks alcohol, you know how long it takes to leave the system. Do you know that with cannabis and all of that?
So cannabis has been, and it might change with the higher concentrate, so I don't know yet. But the truth about cannabis is it's not 30 days detectable on a urine test. That's been an urban legend that's been passed around since I was on probation at age 15, trying to beat drug tests. And back then it was, you drink Golden Seal and cranberry juice and vinegar, it'll clean your system. And I did that yucky stuff, and I beat the drug screen, and guess what? I'm like, it must work. Because I should be dirty for a month, but I just tested for my probation officer, and I was clean. Well, that's because I had a false correlation in my head. What I do know clearly is that THC is out of the body in about 10 days for most people, a week for others. And if someone's been clean for, like, let's say a while, and then they relapse, and they use a bunch tonight, they're going to be clean probably in like 3 days, 4 days on the drug screen. You know, so I was already clean, but I'm holding on my mind that, oh, it's 30 days. And so therefore, that product worked, and it perpetuated the lie about the false correlation of those products. Bad research and science back then.
What triggered me to ask that question was you're saying in Colorado somebody got the DUI for using cannabis. And I'm thinking if it stays in your system, how do they know that you just used the substance versus?
And so that's the same as alcohol even today. So if you got a DUI today, you're going to hire your attorney, you're going to call Jeff Center, the local toxicologist for that very issue in town, to say, hey, I drank the night before, and I drank this much, and so therefore it was worn off like this at this point, and therefore I was not impaired, right? So they do need to figure out, they are inventing instruments for testing curbside. But the reality is, and any police officer will tell you this, because I was talking to some of my friends from Roseville PD, that you're just not supposed to be prescribed, you're not allowed to drive under any mind-altering substance. So if your doctor's like, here's some Ativan, take it as a PRN, here's some Xanax, here's some Oxycontin, Vicodin, or whatever, you're not allowed to drive under the influence of that stuff. You will get a DUI for that if they catch on to that's what's going on. So it's the same for marijuana. So how they knew, I don't know. But that's what the data is suggesting, is that DUIs are up 300% relative to marijuana use. Yeah. Other questions? Oh. Wait. Okay. There might be more to say. Let me see. Let's see if I got it. So the takeaways are, I hope that if you leave with anything, that it is being more clear that you probably have been in a drug bias, seeing one drug as different than the other drug. But when I went through the symptoms of abuse and addiction earlier, you didn't know which drug that was. Right? Because the symptoms are the same. The bias was, I will leave this room right now to go get my person I care about from the park this instant with certain drugs, and I will wait, maybe, for alcohol and marijuana. Other takeaways is that it's easier to prevent symptoms from progressing than to try to reverse them. And the model we're in now is to try to reverse it. As a matter of fact, if you take a kid who's used one time and you call their insurance company and try to get them into an outpatient program to be seen, even though I said individually, not group, they're not going to get authorization. So we live in a system that perpetuates a problem like that as well. You know, and sadly, there are clinicians that if a kid has used once, that are drug and alcohol counselors, that are like this, Mom, Dad, come back when it's a problem. And we've dealt with that, you know. We're like, come on, we'll deal with that. And so we just have to get more educated, you know. But I'm trying to just make the argument today that the heroin epidemic we're in is bad. It's going to keep getting worse. I'm glad that the government's talking about it. I'm glad that as of yesterday, buprenorphine is allowed and is being funded and is being routed to treatment programs. That's awesome, because when buprenorphine was helping my OxyContin clients, it was $300 to $600 a month prescription, private pay only, and you had to pay for the doctor visit as well. Like, that was hard for people to access, you know. Buprenorphine, if you're not familiar with it, if you're on that medicine, and I like Vivitrol probably even better, it's the same sort of thing. But if someone's on buprenorphine and they use heroin, they're not going to get high from the heroin. And they're not going to overdose on buprenorphine. And if someone's on buprenorphine, they actually decrease tolerance to that medicine over time. Methadone, you might increase tolerance over time and need more and more. And if you're on methadone and you use heroin, that's a problem. You're going to totally get high. So this medicine's been great. It's been helpful. It works in the opiate system it's both an agonist and an antagonist of the opiate system. So if you think about that door that keeps opening right now as the opiate receptors, when we use heroin or OxyContin, that door is going to fly wide open. If we use just naloxone or naltrexone, which can be used as a treatment, it's going to keep it slammed shut, but that addict's going to stay craving. What buprenorphine does is opens that door a few inches. It puts that little chain, you know, that little chain lock we used to have in the 1970s on our homes. Like, oh yeah, that's good. Let me hold on. All right, come on in. It's like that chain lock. So it opens that receptor, not to experience intoxication, but for stabilization. And the reason that people need to be on the substance for like a year or two is to wait for, when they were using the opiates, it created too many extra mu and kappa opiate receptors. And those stay around a long time, and they keep craving. And that obsession and compulsion is hard for addicts to deal with. And so over time, with that medicine, those receptors start to die off and come back to a true, more normal homeostasis. I think if you have a problem with someone being on buprenorphine, you should just assess. Well, are you going to work? Are you going to school on that medicine? How are you treating your spouse? Are you sneaking the medicine? Are you increasing it over time? You're going to find they're decreasing over time. They're doing their functioning, and life is going on. But where it's been bashed is because it works on the opiate system. So therefore, it should just carte blanche be bad. It's not the case. Anyway, last questions. Go to my website. Check out some stuff on wax dabs and butter. There's a lot of videos. I have right on my homepage at recoveryhappens.com. I gave a lecture specific to interpersonal neurobiology. It's a 2-hour lecture to the master's degree students in Southern California, and I put that video up on my website. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, it's right there. And then in the newsletters area at the bottom are a lot of interviews with the media that I've done. And there's one that's a gal in our program that talked about her psychotic break with wax dabs and butter, her face is blurred and all that kind of stuff to protect her identity. I have a newsletter that goes out regularly, so if you want to get on that, You can subscribe on the website, and then I'm on Facebook as well. And I post a lot of stuff there. You'll see pictures of my kids, but from time to time, you'll get some research as well. So, thanks for your time.
I'd just like to add one thing. If everyone can fill out those surveys and leave them on the tables, and we'll come around and pick them up. Go ahead, John.
That's it.
I just wanted to make sure.
Yep, before everyone runs out. Thank you.
Great job.